The UK and Australia just rolled out their biggest sanctions against Russia since the war began, while the European Union unveiled its 16th wave of penalties. The big worry for the West, that Putin might somehow twist negotiations with the US to work in his favor. Not too long ago, there was news that US and Russian officials planned to meet in Istanbul to discuss a possible settlement. Before that, they'd already held 2 meetings in Riyadh, both of which Putin kept a very close eye on. Now, at this turning point in the war where every move matters, something unexpected has shifted the spotlight, not just on Putin, but also on how the West is responding. While the US has been hitting Russia with tariffs, Canada has taken things even further, stepping up with its own round of sanctions. Following in the footsteps of the EU, Australia, and the UK, Canadian leaders decided to tighten the screws even more. This time, they zeroed in on people in Putin's inner circle, those closest to him. The move sent shockwaves through the Kremlin. Even Washington and Brussels probably didn't see this coming. Now let's break down how Canada's sanctions could shake up the battlefield at this crucial moment, and how they might stop the Kremlin from walking away from negotiations with the upper hand. Thanks for tuning to our channel. Please do not forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell. Let's dive back into the big story. As we mentioned earlier, Canada caught everyone off guard by hitting Russia with one of the toughest sanctions packages yet. This latest round of restrictions targets more than 70 individuals and businesses linked to Russia. But that's just the beginning. Canada also went after over 100 ghost ships that help Russia dodge sanctions and keep its economy afloat. A total of 109 vessels from Russia's hidden fleet, some dating all the way back to 1978, are now under these new restrictions. That includes 92 oil tankers shipping Russian crude to other countries, 9 vessels carrying liquefied natural gas, LNG, and 8 ships suspected of transporting weapons from Iran and North Korea straight to Moscow. But Canada didn't stop at ships. High-ranking Russian officials and wealthy oligarchs, all with deep ties to the Kremlin, also landed on the blacklist. In total, Canada has sanctioned more than 3,000 Russian individuals and companies, those accused of violating Ukraine's sovereignty, funding military operations, and engaging in serious human rights abuses. The most shocking part? This time, Canada went straight for Putin's inner circle. The new sanctions list includes Anna Tsivaleva, Putin's own niece, as well as Dmitry Loginov, a top defense official. His wife and son from his first marriage were also sanctioned. Energy Minister Sergei Tsivilev, another key figure close to the Russian president, wasn't spared either. The crackdown extended beyond politicians and oligarchs. Canada also went after Russian military branches, including the aerospace forces and the radiation, chemical, and biological defense forces. A number of pro-Kremlin organizations that push propaganda, like the Akhmat Kadyrov Foundation, the Russian Copper Company, and the Internet Development Institute, were also put on notice. Even individuals who've worked to shape Russia's public image landed in hot water. Alexei Goroslavsky, the head of the Internet Development Institute, along with famous journalist and TV host Vladimir Posner and sports official Elena Vyalbe, were among those sanctioned. Canada also expanded its list to include several powerful Russian business leaders. Billionaire Igor Altushkin, the founder of the Russian Copper Company, and political strategist Ilya Gambashidze are now facing restrictions, along with Vladimir Tabak, the director of a Russian state media group. Perhaps one of the more surprising names on the list is German journalist Hubert Seipel. He wrote 2 books about Putin, allegedly funded by billionaire Alexei Mordashov. Now he too has been sanctioned. According to Canada's government, all these individuals and entities have either helped fuel Russia's war machine or played a role in spreading Kremlin propaganda to justify the invasion of Ukraine. Since 2014, Canada has imposed sanctions on more than 3,000 people and organizations across Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova. Since 2022 alone, Canada has committed over $14 billion in aid to Ukraine, both military and financial. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made it clear that these sanctions are meant to keep up the pressure on Russia. While Ukraine's leadership will likely welcome this bold move, the mood in Moscow is a different story. The Kremlin now faces a fresh wave of challenges as it tries to navigate the fallout. With Canada stepping up in such a decisive way, European nations may feel encouraged to tighten their own sanctions. EU leaders could seize this moment to increase their pressure on Putin, making life even harder for his administration. Perhaps most importantly, these new sanctions come at a time when Russia is engaged in delicate negotiations over the war. By targeting Putin's closest allies, Canada may have just made it harder for the Kremlin to gain any leverage in potential peace talks. Putin's team will likely demand that these sanctions be eased in any negotiation process. But that won't come without a price. If Russia wants relief, it may have to make serious concessions. This could throw a wrench in Putin's strategy to use diplomacy to his advantage, especially when dealing with the US and the EU. In short, Canada has made a game-changing move against Russia at a critical moment. And now, Canada's actions go far beyond just economic sanctions. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recently traveled to Kiev, standing alongside European leaders to mark the third anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But his visit wasn't just about commemorations. It came with some bold statements and potential game-changing decisions. One of the biggest takeaways? Trudeau didn't rule out the possibility of sending Canadian troops to Ukraine if a ceasefire agreement is reached. During a press conference with other world leaders, he was asked directly about the idea of Canadian soldiers being deployed on the ground. His response was careful but clear. He emphasized that any such decision would be made in coordination with Canada's allies and neighbors. When pressed for more details later, Trudeau doubled down on his main focus, securing a ceasefire and laying the groundwork for long-term peace. But he also stressed that any move to send troops into Ukraine was a serious matter that couldn't be taken lightly. Beyond military strategy, Trudeau took the opportunity to call out Russian President Vladimir Putin's efforts to spread chaos and weaken democracies across the globe. He vowed that Canada would play a role in pushing back against these threats. This meeting in Kyiv took place at a time when concerns were growing across Europe about negotiations between Washington and Moscow that had left Ukraine out of the conversation. Trudeau's presence in Ukraine signaled that Canada was committed to keeping Kyiv involved in its own future. Following the meeting, Trudeau announced that Canada would finally deliver on a long-standing promise: $5 billion in financial aid to Ukraine. This funding will come from profits generated by frozen Russian assets, a move that has been in the works for years. Canada isn't alone in this effort. The G7 also announced a massive $50 billion aid package for Ukraine, structured to be repaid through future revenues generated from seized Russian assets. For Ukraine, this financial backing is critical, but Canada knows that money alone isn't enough. Military support is just as essential. Trudeau confirmed that Canada would be sending additional military equipment to Ukrainian forces. This includes 25 light armored vehicles, 2 combat support vehicles, and extra funding to help Ukraine shore up its energy infrastructure after relentless Russian attacks on its power grid. On top of that, Canada will be supplying Ukraine with 4 F-16 flight simulators, further strengthening its ability to train pilots and enhance air defense. This follows a previous delivery of landing systems for fighter jets. All of this aid highlights Canada's deepening partnership with Ukraine. But it's not just about equipment. Canada has also been committed to training Ukrainian soldiers. Trudeau has made it clear that Canada sees military training as a key part of ensuring Ukraine can continue resisting Russian aggression and defending its sovereignty. Beyond military aid, Canada is stepping up in other ways too. Trudeau's office announced funding for a wide range of initiatives, including protective gear for nuclear-related threats and programs aimed at empowering women in politics. Meanwhile, Canadian Foreign Minister Melanie Joly recently spoke about increasing Canada's role in Ukraine's defense efforts. She suggested that more Canadians could soon be involved in supporting Ukraine, noting that the UK and other allies are already considering deploying troops as part of a potential peacekeeping mission. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky expressed his gratitude, highlighting Canada's role in training Ukrainian troops and supplying advanced optical technology for drones used in battle. These contributions, he noted, have made a real impact on the front lines. Despite recent uncertainty surrounding U.S. support for Ukraine, Zelensky reassured the world that European backing remains strong. He emphasized that Ukraine is determined to end the war on its own terms, without compromising its borders or sovereignty. Meanwhile, Canada's government has been clear about its stance. Officials stated that those targeted by new sanctions were directly involved in either fueling Russia's war machine or spreading Kremlin propaganda to manipulate global opinion. Beyond Trudeau's sweeping aid package, Canada's foreign minister also weighed in. Echoing Zelensky's message, she pointed out that Europe is standing firm, while Washington's position remains uncertain. The meeting Trudeau attended in Kyiv came at a time when frustration was growing in Europe over US-Russia negotiations that left Ukraine out of the discussion. Canada and its European allies firmly believe that Russia is responsible for launching an unprovoked war against a sovereign nation. So for them, economic sanctions and military assistance must go hand in hand. When it comes to Ukraine's potential NATO membership, Canada is fully aligned with the European Union. Many European leaders have already voiced their support for Ukraine joining the alliance, and Trudeau has made it clear that Canada backs this idea. He also reiterated his stance that Ukraine must be involved in any negotiations that determine its future. For Canada, this position isn't new. The country has been one of Ukraine's most outspoken supporters on the world stage. Trudeau has repeatedly called for Russia to be held accountable and has used global forums to push for stronger measures against Moscow. In terms of financial and military aid, Canada has been a major donor. According to the Kiel Institute for the World Economy, Canada ranks 5th in total support for Ukraine, including military, economic, and humanitarian assistance. However, when measured by military aid per capita, Canada falls to 20th place. Some analysts have criticized Ottawa for delays in delivering requested equipment, arguing that Canada should be doing more to meet Ukraine's urgent needs. However, with its latest sanctions and increased military assistance, Canada may now shift the narrative surrounding its role in the war. Trudeau's active involvement in Kyiv signals that his government is making a stronger effort to back Ukraine in a meaningful way. The European Union, too, was paying close attention to this meeting. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who participated virtually, called on G7 nations to take tougher action. He pushed for more aggressive measures against financial institutions, helping Moscow dodge sanctions, and proposed further restrictions on Russian oil sales. As these discussions unfold, the UK is reportedly considering one of the most dramatic steps yet, sending troops to Ukraine. Some European nations, including France, have shown support for the idea, sparking a wave of speculation in international media about whether this will actually happen. While no final decisions have been made, the conversation is gaining traction. If the UK moves forward with this plan, it could mark a major escalation in Western involvement. At the same time, Prime Minister Keir Starmer must weigh how such a decision would be received at home. Sending British troops abroad, even for peacekeeping, has always been a topic that sparks debate. The last time the UK seriously considered deploying soldiers was back in 2014, when David Cameron's government discussed intervention in Syria alongside the Obama administration. Since then, direct military deployments have been off the table. But now, the situation is shifting. The idea of sending peacekeeping forces to Ukraine has gained traction, and recent polls show a majority of the British public supports it. In a January survey, 58% of respondents favored the idea, with Labour voters showing the highest support at 66%. Conservative and Liberal Democrat voters also leaned in favor, while Reform Party supporters were far less enthusiastic. This divide could have political consequences. If Reform continues to push back against the idea, it may further widen the gap between them and mainstream parties, making it harder for Prime Minister Keir Starmer to manage the shifting voter landscape. However, one factor in his favor is that outright opposition to peacekeeping remains low. Only 15% of Labour supporters and 21% of the general public are against the move. For Starmer, the challenge will be to make sure the British public understands why sending troops as peacekeepers might be necessary. Meanwhile, France has also been weighing its own role in Ukraine. While President Emmanuel Macron recently clarified that no troops would be sent tomorrow, he hinted that France could provide security guarantees to Ukraine after a ceasefire agreement is reached. This suggests that while Paris isn't rushing into troop deployment, it sees the Russian occupation as an ongoing threat. French officials have been vocal about the dangers posed by the Kremlin, repeatedly emphasizing that Russian aggression isn't just a problem for Ukraine. It's a direct threat to Europe as a whole. Macron himself recently warned that Russia represents an existential threat to European security. Both France and the UK have signaled that if an emergency or post-war stabilization effort requires peacekeepers in Ukraine, they are willing to step in. However, their immediate focus remains on military, financial, and humanitarian assistance rather than troop deployment. The UK has ramped up its support for wounded Ukrainian soldiers, doubling its investment in a key initiative known as Project Renovator. This program funds life-saving medical care, rehabilitation, and training for surgeons. It also includes efforts to rebuild a military hospital that was targeted and bombed by Russian forces. By leveraging British medical expertise, the project aims to expand Ukraine's ability to care for injured troops, helping them recover, return to the battlefield if possible, or transition back into civilian life. UK Defense Secretary John Healey announced a £20 million funding boost for the initiative, reinforcing Britain's long-term commitment to Ukraine. Beyond medical aid, the UK is encouraging its NATO allies to step up their efforts as part of a broader assistance plan for Ukraine. The rehabilitation hospital will serve as a key resource, providing advanced prosthetics, physiotherapy, and essential recovery services. Ukrainian doctors, nurses, and surgeons are also being trained by British experts to expand the country's medical capabilities. This announcement comes at a significant moment, marking 3 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion. It also coincides with new UK government measures aimed at preventing Russian elites from entering Britain. Since 2022, the UK has committed £12.8 billion in military, humanitarian, and economic aid to Ukraine. Meanwhile, France has made its own major contribution to Ukraine's defense. One of its most significant recent moves was supplying Mirage fighter jets to strengthen Ukraine's air force. Since the beginning of the war, France has provided more than €3.8 billion in assistance, including financial aid, weapons, and military training. Around 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers have undergone training with the French army in Poland and France. Beyond military aid, France, like the UK, continues to provide humanitarian support to Ukraine, ensuring that civilians affected by the war receive essential supplies and assistance. Canada's involvement has also drawn attention. As part of a broader Western strategy, Canada has joined these efforts by imposing strict sanctions on Russia and providing Ukraine with crucial financial and military support. The European Union has openly praised Canada's commitment. EU officials have emphasized that Ottawa's continued backing of Ukraine, despite facing economic pressure from US tariffs, demonstrates true strategic alignment. With new trade restrictions potentially on the horizon, Canada remains firm in its stance, standing by Ukraine with military, financial, and humanitarian aid. Alongside its financial support, France has also played a key role in training Ukrainian troops. So far, around 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers have undergone training under the guidance of the French military, both in France and Poland. This training ensures that Ukrainian forces are better equipped to handle battlefield challenges and strengthens their overall defense strategy. At the same time, the French government, much like the UK, is also extending humanitarian aid to Ukraine. This includes medical supplies, food assistance, and other critical resources to help civilians affected by the ongoing war. Meanwhile, Canada has stepped up its efforts as well. Its commitment to Ukraine hasn't gone unnoticed, especially by European leaders. As part of its broader strategy, the European Union has not only imposed harsh sanctions on Russia, but has also expressed strong support for Canada's actions. According to EU officials, Canada's ongoing military, financial, and humanitarian backing of Ukraine is crucial, particularly at a time when Ottawa is facing economic challenges due to US tariffs. With new trade restrictions expected to come into effect soon, Canada remains committed to standing by Ukraine despite these economic pressures. Thank you for watching, and do not forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell.